Ghost stories have been passed down for centuries, warnings of restless spirits and places where the past refuses to stay buried. Tonight, you'll hear some of the most chilling tales of haunting encounters and things that should not exist. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. The first time Ellie mentioned her friend, I didn't think much of it. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, right? It's part of growing up, part of their little minds stretching out into the world, creating companions to fill the gaps. But Ellie wasn't the kind of kid who made things up. She was quiet, observant, the type who'd rather stare at the cracks in the sidewalk than chase after butterflies. So when she started talking about the boy at her window, I should have known something was off. I should have listened. "He's outside again," she said one night, her voice steady, like she was telling me the sky was blue. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, her small hands gripping the blanket, her eyes fixed on the window. The curtains were drawn, but she kept staring at them like she could see right through. "Who's outside, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. My voice was calm, but something about the way she looked, her pupils too wide, her lips pressed into a thin line, made my stomach twist. "The boy," she said, like it was obvious. "He comes every night. He watches me." I glanced at the window, then back at her. "Ellie, there's no one out there. It's just the trees moving in the wind." She shook her head, her dark hair swaying. "No, he's real. He's pale, and his eyes are black. He smiles at me." I forced a laugh, brushing her hair back. "Sounds like a scary dream. Maybe we should stop watching those cartoons before bed, huh?" She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. "He's not a dream, Mommy. He's real." I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and told her everything was fine. But as I left her room, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Kids say weird things. They get scared. It's normal. But it wasn't normal. Not the way she said it. Not the way she looked. The next night, Ellie brought it up again. We were at the dinner table, and she was pushing her peas around her plate, her fork scraping against the ceramic. My husband, Mark, was halfway through a story about work when Ellie interrupted him. "The boy was at my window again," she said, her voice cutting through the conversation like a knife. Mark stopped mid-sentence, his fork hovering over his plate. He glanced at me, then at Ellie. "What boy?" "The one I told Mommy about," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "He's always there. He watches me." Mark frowned, setting his fork down. "Ellie, there's no boy at your window. You're on the 3rd floor. No one can reach that high." "He's not on the ground," she said, her voice sharp, almost impatient. "He's floating. He just stays there. And he smiles." Mark's face tightened. He didn't like this kind of talk. He was a practical man, the kind who believed in facts and logic, not ghost stories. "Ellie, you're imagining things." "I'm not," she snapped, her small hands balling into fists. "He's real. Why don't you believe me?" "Because it's impossible," Mark said, his voice rising. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters or whatever you're talking about. Now eat your dinner." Ellie glared at him, her lower lip trembling. She didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. I didn't either. I just sat there, staring at my plate, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. A week passed, and Ellie kept talking about the boy. Every night, without fail, she'd tell us he was there, watching her. Mark refused to entertain it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ellie wasn't sleeping well. She had dark circles under her eyes, and she started jumping at every little noise. I tried to comfort her, but nothing worked. She was scared, and I didn't know how to help her. Then, one night, Mark came home with a security camera. "I'm putting it in Ellie's room," he said, setting the box on the kitchen counter. "If there's really something outside her window, we'll catch it." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "You don't actually believe her, do you?" "No," he said, his voice firm. But this will prove it's all in her head. Once she sees there's nothing there, she'll stop. I didn't argue. Part of me wanted him to be right. But another part of me, a deeper, darker part, was afraid of what we might find. The camera was small, barely noticeable, mounted in the corner of Ellie's room. It faced the window, capturing the curtains, the glass, and the darkness beyond. We set it up before bed, telling Ellie it was just to keep her safe. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she didn't believe us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the camera, about what it might capture. I told myself it was nothing, that Ellie's imagination was just running wild, but the doubt gnawed at me, growing louder with every passing hour. The next morning, Mark checked the footage. I stood behind him, my arms crossed, my heart racing as he clicked through the video. The first few hours were uneventful. Just Ellie sleeping, the curtains swaying slightly in the breeze. But then, around 2 a.m., something changed. The camera caught it all. The curtains parted, just enough to reveal the window. And there, pressed against the glass, was a face. It was pale, almost white, with hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the light. Its lips were stretched into a wide, unnatural smile, too big for its face. It didn't move. It just stared into the room, its black eyes fixed on Ellie's bed. Mark froze, his hand hovering over the mouse. I couldn't breathe. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the screen, to that face, that horrible, smiling face. It was real. Ellie hadn't been imagining things. The boy at the window was real. We didn't tell Ellie what we'd seen. We couldn't. How do you explain something like that to a child? Instead, we moved her to our room, telling her it was just for a little while. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes hollow, like she already knew. The camera stayed in her room, recording every night. And every night the boy appeared. Sometimes he was there for a few seconds, sometimes for minutes. But he always came, always smiling. It's been months now, and Ellie still sleeps in our room. She doesn't talk about the boy anymore, but I know he's still there. I can see it in her eyes, in the way she flinches at every sound, in the way she stares at the window like she's waiting for something. Mark doesn't talk about it either. He just sits in front of the computer every morning watching the footage, his face pale, his hands trembling. He doesn't say a word, but I know what he's thinking. We both are. The boy isn't going away, and we don't know how to make him. The last time I checked the footage, I saw something new. The boy wasn't just staring at Ellie's bed anymore. He was looking directly at the camera, his black eyes piercing through the screen, his smile wider than ever. And this time, he waved. The forest was quiet. We should have known better. We'd heard the stories. Everyone in town had. The whispers about Black Hollow Forest, the local legends that made kids dare each other to step past the tree line at dusk. But we were older now, or at least we thought we were. Old enough to laugh off the tales as campfire fodder. Old enough to think we were invincible. There were 5 of us. Me, Jess, Ryan, Marcus, and Claire. We'd been friends since middle school, bound by shared detentions and bad decisions. This trip was supposed to be a last hurrah before college scattered us like leaves in the wind. Jess had suggested it, of course. She was always the one pushing us to do stupid things. Her grin wide enough to make you forget the consequences. "Come on," she'd said, leaning across the diner table, her voice low and teasing. "What's the worst that could happen?" We'd set up camp just before sunset, the kind of golden hour that makes even the ugliest places look magical. The forest wasn't ugly, though. It was beautiful in a way that made your skin crawl. The trees were too tall, their branches twisting together like they were conspiring. The air smelled damp, earthy, with a faint metallic tang that I couldn't place. We pitched our tents in a small clearing, the kind of spot that felt too perfect, like it had been waiting for us. "This is it," Ryan said, slinging his backpack onto the ground. "Home sweet home for the next 2 days." He was the practical one, always prepared, always calm. He'd brought a first aid kit, a compass, even a flare gun. Just in case, he'd said when Jess teased him about it. Marcus, on the other hand, had brought a six-pack and a Bluetooth speaker. Priorities, he'd said with a wink, cracking open a beer as soon as the tents were up. Claire rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. She was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you wonder what she was thinking. She'd been like that since her dad died last year, like part of her had gone with him. We built a fire, the flames licking at the darkening sky, and passed around a bag of marshmallows. Jess told ghost stories, her voice dipping and rising like she was performing on stage. She loved an audience. They say if you hear your name in the forest, you don't answer, she said, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. Because it's not really your name, it's something else, something that wants you to follow it. Bullshit, Marcus said, tossing a marshmallow at her. She caught it mid-air and stuck out her tongue. You're just scared, she shot back. Of what? Your bad storytelling? We laughed, the sound echoing through the trees, but the laughter died quickly, swallowed by the forest. I didn't like the way it felt, like the trees were leaning in, listening. It started around midnight. I was half asleep, curled up in my sleeping bag, when I heard it. A rustling, just outside the tent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, like someone or something was testing the ground. I told myself it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe, or a deer. But then it came again, closer this time, and I knew it wasn't an animal. The footsteps were too deliberate, too human. Guys, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Do you hear that? No one answered. The tent was silent except for the sound of Jess's steady breathing. She was asleep, her back to me, her hair spilling across her pillow. I reached out and shook her shoulder. Jess, I hissed, wake up. She groaned, rolling over. What? Listen. We both lay there, straining to hear. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath. And then, from somewhere just outside the tent, came a voice. Jess. It was her name, but it wasn't her voice. It was close, almost right, but there was something off about it, something that made my stomach twist. Jess sat up, her eyes wide. What the hell? She whispered. Don't answer, I said, my voice low and urgent. Jess! The voice came again, louder this time. It was her name, but it wasn't her. It was something mimicking her, something that didn't quite get it right. Who's out there? Jess called, her voice trembling. Jess, no, I started, but it was too late. The footsteps came again, faster now, circling the tent. And then another voice joined the first. Claire. It was Marcus's voice, but it wasn't Marcus. It was wrong, the tone too flat, the cadence just slightly off. Claire sat up, her face pale in the dim light. What is that? She whispered. Don't answer, I said again, my heart pounding. Just don't. Ryan. This time it was my voice, or something close to it. Ryan jerked awake, his eyes darting to the tent flap. What's going on? He asked, his voice tight with fear. Something's out there, I said. It's mimicking us. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. And then, all at once, the voices started again, overlapping, echoing, a cacophony of sounds that weren't quite right. Jess, Claire, Ryan, Marcus. It was all of us, but none of us. The voices were too high, too low, too sharp, too flat. They were us, but they weren't. And they were getting closer. We need to get out of here, Ryan said, his voice low and urgent. He reached for the flare gun, his hands shaking as he loaded it. And go where? Jess asked, her voice rising. It's out there. We can't stay here, I said, my mind racing. We'll head for the car, stick together. We moved quickly, silently, grabbing whatever we could carry. Ryan went first, the flare gun in his hand, his jaw set. Jess followed, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Claire was next, her face pale but determined. Marcus brought up the rear, his usual bravado replaced by a grim silence. The forest was darker than I remembered, the trees pressing in on all sides. The voices followed us, always just out of sight, always just out of reach. Jess, Claire, Ryan, Marcus. They were closer now, the voices overlapping, blending together into a single, discordant sound. I could feel them, like a presence at my back, like something breathing down my neck. And then suddenly the voices stopped. We froze, the silence pressing in on us like a weight. Ryan raised the flare gun, his eyes scanning the trees. "Where'd they go?" Jess whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The forest was too quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate. And then, from somewhere deep in the trees, came a single voice. "Stay." It wasn't mimicking us this time. It was its own voice, low and guttural, like the sound of roots breaking through stone. We ran. The car was a mile away, maybe more, but we didn't stop. We didn't look back. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in around us, the ground uneven and treacherous. But we kept going, driven by a fear that was primal, instinctual. When we finally reached the car, we didn't speak. We just piled in, Ryan slamming the door shut behind us. He started the engine, the sound impossibly loud in the silence, and we drove away, the forest receding in the rearview mirror. We didn't talk about it on the way home. We didn't talk about it for days. The first time I saw it, I told myself it was nothing. Just my mind playing tricks on me, the way it does when you live alone too long. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to will myself to sleep. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 3:32 a.m. One more minute, and I'd have been asleep. But then I heard it. A soft creak, like the floorboards shifting under weight. My eyes snapped to the open doorway, the hallway beyond swallowed by darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest, standing just beyond the threshold. It wasn't moving, just there. My breath caught in my throat and I froze, my fingers digging into the edge of the blanket. I blinked, hard, trying to clear the image. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. The hallway was empty. Just the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Hello?" My voice came out thin, barely above a whisper. No answer. Of course, there was no answer. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, fumbling with the switch. Light flooded the room, spilling into the hallway. Nothing. Just the same old hallway with its peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Something had been there. Something had been watching me. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was ready. I'd left the hallway light on, just in case. But at 3:32 a.m., the light flickered and went out. I sat up, my stomach twisting into knots. The shadow was back, standing in the same spot. Tall, impossibly tall, its edges blurred, like it was made of smoke. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the doorway. The beam cut through the darkness, but the shadow didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. Or at least, I thought it was staring. It didn't have eyes, it didn't have a face, just darkness. I screamed. I don't even remember doing it, but I must have, because the sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls. The shadow didn't flinch. It just stood there, motionless, until I lunged for the lamp again. The light came on, and it was gone. Just like before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone, staring at the empty hallway. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it felt real. The next morning, I called a security company. I didn't tell them about the shadow. I just said I wanted cameras installed. They came that afternoon. 2 guys in matching uniforms who moved through the house like they'd done it 1,000 times before. They set up cameras in every room, including the hallway. I watched them work, my arms crossed over my chest, trying to ignore the knot of dread in my stomach. "You expecting trouble?" one of them asked, glancing at me over his shoulder. "Just want to be safe," I said, my voice tight. He nodded, like he'd heard it 1,000,000 times before. "Smart move. Better to be safe than sorry." When they left, I stood in the hallway, staring at the tiny black camera mounted near the ceiling. It felt like a lifeline. If something happened, I'd have proof. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I stayed up. I told myself I wouldn't sleep, that I'd wait for 3:33 a.m. and see what happened. But exhaustion got the better of me. I woke up to the sound of the floor creaking. My eyes flew open and I saw it again. The shadow, standing in the hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs and I reached for the lamp. The light came on and the shadow was gone. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security app. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in the password. The footage loaded and I fast-forwarded to 3:30 a.m. The hallway was empty, just the faint glow of the streetlight. At 3:32, the light flickered and went out. My breath caught as the shadow appeared, materializing out of nowhere. It stood there, motionless, until I turned on the lamp. Then it was gone. I played it again, and again. Each time the shadow appeared at exactly 3:33 a.m. I felt sick, my stomach churning as I stared at the screen. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light. Something was in my house. Something that shouldn't exist. The next few nights were a blur. I tried everything, leaving the lights on, sleeping with the TV on, even staying at a friend's house. But no matter what I did, the shadow was there. Every night, at 3:33 a.m. I started to dread the nights, the hours ticking by like a countdown to something terrible. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I felt like I was losing my mind. I decided to call a priest. I didn't know what else to do. He came that afternoon, a tall man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. I showed him the footage, my hands shaking as I explained what had been happening. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. "Have you tried talking to it?" he asked, his voice gentle. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. "Talking to it?" He nodded. "Sometimes, these things, they just want to be heard." I didn't know what to say. The idea of talking to the shadow made my skin crawl. But I was desperate. That night I sat in the hallway again, waiting for 3:33 a.m. When the shadow appeared, I didn't run. I just sat there, staring at it. "What do you want?" My voice was barely above a whisper. The shadow didn't answer. It just stood there, motionless. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "If you're trying to tell me something, I'm listening." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow shifted, its edges blurring like smoke. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I clenched my fists to keep from running. The shadow didn't move closer. It just faded, like it had never been there at all. The next night, the shadow didn't come back. Or the night after that. I kept the cameras running just in case, but the footage was always the same. An empty hallway, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlight. I didn't know what had happened. Maybe the shadow had gotten what it wanted. Maybe it had just moved on. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me awake. I blinked at the screen, the blue light cutting through the darkness like a knife. The name flashed. Ethan. My stomach dropped. Ethan had been dead for a week. I stared at the notification, my throat tightening. A missed call. At 03:07 a.m., my fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone and tapped the voicemail icon. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. I pressed play. Static hissed through the speaker, sharp and grating. Then his voice, but wrong, distorted, stretched thin, like a record played at the wrong speed. "Help me," it rasped, each word clawing at my ears. "I'm not gone." More static, louder this time, drowning out whatever came next. The message ended abruptly, leaving a silence that pressed against my skull. I sat there, gripping the phone, my breath shallow. Ethan's face flashed in my mind. We'd buried him. I'd seen the casket lowered into the ground. But that voice, it was his. I couldn't unhear it. I threw the phone onto the bed like it had burned me. My heart pounded, and I forced myself to breathe. "It's a prank," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Someone's screwing with me." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. Who would do that? Who could even mimic his voice like that? The room felt too small, the walls closing in. I grabbed my jacket and shoved my feet into my shoes. I needed air. I needed to think. The streets were empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound louder. The scrape of my shoes on the pavement, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I walked aimlessly, trying to shake the unease crawling under my skin. By the time I got back, the sun was starting to rise, pale light bleeding through the curtains. I checked my phone again, half expecting another call, but the screen was blank. I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at me, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided my phone, left it face down on the counter, but the voicemail lingered in the back of my mind, a splinter I couldn't pull out. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a glitch, a sick joke. But then, on the fourth night, it happened again. I was in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty coffee cup when the phone buzzed. My stomach twisted as I picked it up. Another missed call from Ethan. This time I didn't hesitate. I played the voicemail. The static was worse, a low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. "You have to come." Ethan's voice was barely recognizable now, each word broken, fragmented. The woods, behind, the house. The message cut off with a sharp crackle, like a bone snapping. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. The woods behind his house. That's where we used to hang out as kids, building forts and pretending we were explorers. But it wasn't just nostalgia that pulled at me. It was the way he'd said it, desperate, pleading. I didn't want to go. Every rational part of me screamed to stay away, to delete the message and forget it ever happened. But I couldn't. Ethan had been my best friend. If there was even a chance this was real, if he needed me. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The woods were darker than I remembered, the trees looming like sentinels. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. I followed the path we used to take, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. Every sound made me jump, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then I saw it, a faint light flickering between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The light moved, swaying slightly, like a lantern. I forced myself to keep going, my legs trembling with every step. The clearing was small, the ground uneven. In the center stood a figure, silhouetted against the light. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight catching on familiar features. Ethan's face, pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow. "Ethan?" My voice cracked, barely a whisper. He turned, his movements jerky, unnatural. "You came," he said, his voice still distorted, but softer now. "I knew you would." I took a step back, my pulse racing. "What's going on? How are you?" "I don't know," he said, his head tilting at an odd angle. "I woke up here. I don't know how long I've been Like this. The air felt heavier, pressing down on me. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't want to be here. I don't want to be this." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "How?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand trembling. The moment our fingers touched, a jolt shot through me, sharp and electric. The world spun, the trees blurring together. I stumbled back, my vision swimming. When it cleared, Ethan was gone. The light was gone. I was alone in the clearing, the silence deafening. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the spot where he'd been. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. Was it real? Was it some kind of hallucination? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that the voicemail stopped after that night. I never went back to the woods. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, that same unease crawled under my skin. A constant reminder of what I'd seen. Ethan's face, his voice, the way he looked at me. It haunted me, worse than any ghost story ever could. Sometimes late at night, I'll catch myself staring at my phone, half expecting it to buzz. But it never does. And part of me is relieved. Because I don't know if I could answer if it did. The attic smelled like dust and forgotten things. I hadn't planned on going up there, but Grandma had asked me to fetch an old photo album she swore was tucked away in one of the boxes. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed, the dim light from the single bulb swinging above, casting long shadows across the room. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were intruding on someone else's memories, like the air itself was holding its breath. I found the album easily enough, but something else caught my eye. A doll, perched on a wooden crate near the back. It was old, its porcelain face cracked and yellowed, but there was something about it that felt alive. Its glassy blue eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination, the kind of thing that happens when you're alone in a place like this. But then I noticed something strange. The doll had been facing the wall when I first saw it. Now, it was turned toward me. I didn't mention it to Grandma. She was already frazzled enough, her hands trembling as she flipped through the album, pointing out faces I barely recognized. "That's your great-aunt Margaret," she said, her voice thin and distant. She was a strange one, always talking to herself, like she was carrying on a conversation with someone no one else could see. I nodded, but my mind was still on the doll. I told myself I must have misremembered its position, that the dim light had played tricks on me. But later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of its cracked smile, the way its eyes seemed to glint in the dark. The next morning, I went back up to the attic. The doll was still there, but this time, it was sitting on the floor, its legs splayed out in front of it. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't touched it. I was sure of that. And yet, there it was, as if it had climbed down from the crate on its own. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against its cold porcelain skin. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was filled with something more than stuffing. I turned it over, examining it for any signs of tampering, but there was nothing. Just the faint smell of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sweet and sickly, like rotting flowers. The changes were subtle at first. The doll would be in a different position every time I saw it. Its head tilted slightly to the side or its arms crossed over its chest. I started taking pictures, trying to document the shifts. But every time I looked at the photos, the doll was exactly where I'd left it. It was like the changes only happened when I wasn't looking, as if it knew when I was watching. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the floor. My room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat, and there it was, the doll, standing in the corner of the room. Its head was tilted back, its glassy eyes staring up at the ceiling. I blinked, sure I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes again, it was still there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes fixed on the doll, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. It just stood there, its cracked smile frozen in place, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. The final straw came a week later. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to focus on my homework, when I felt it. A cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned around, and there it was, the doll, sitting on the counter. Its head was tilted to the side, its eyes half closed, like it was about to fall asleep. And then it blinked. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, as the doll's eyes slowly opened again. Its gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt like it was looking into me, like it could see every thought, every fear, every secret I'd ever had. I grabbed the doll and shoved it into a box, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the lid. I carried it out to the garage and buried it under a pile of old tools and broken furniture. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't think they'd believe me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The sound of something scraping against the floor, like tiny porcelain feet dragging themselves across the wood. And I know it's still there. I don't go into the garage anymore.